In 1533, Hans Holbein painted what looked like the definitive portrait of human power. Two men at the height of their influence, expensive fabrics, science and reason arranged like an inventory of everything money could control. For centuries, this is how the painting was read, a showcase of success, a triumph of order. But something in that image always felt wrong. At the bottom of the painting, almost tearing through the floor like a visual wound, there is a shape that refuses to follow the rules. A grey smear, out of place, that doesn't belong to the rest of the scene. In the 19th century, the National Gallery tried to neutralize the problem in the most embarrassing way possible. It officially catalogued that anomaly as a fishbone, useless debris, a minor mistake in an otherwise perfect work. That explanation wasn't correct. It was comfortable. That stain is not an accident. It is not dirt. It is not a technical flaw. It was placed there intentionally. And ironically, it is the most honest part of the entire painting. If you can't understand it right now, the problem isn't the artwork. It's the exact spot where you decided to stand. This painting was not meant to be viewed head-on. And as long as you insist on looking at it the right way, you will keep seeing everything wrong. For the image to reveal what it's really hiding, you're going to have to step out of the center. But before you change your physical position to solve the mystery on the floor, there is a more urgent puzzle waiting at eye level. Because visual distortion is not the only lie on this canvas. The greatest deception here is the calmness of these men. To understand why, we need to look at the invisible date hanging over the scene. 1533. This was not just another year on the calendar, it was a breaking point. In London, the air was heavy. Henry VIII was about to detonate a political and religious bomb at the heart of Europe. The definitive break with the Catholic Church in order to marry Anne Boleyn. The continent was moving toward a war of faith. And yet, in the eye of that storm, two French diplomats chose to pose as if they were untouchable. Jean de Dinteville and Georges de Selve. At just 29 and 25 years old, they already stood at the top of the social and intellectual hierarchy. And they did not commission Hans Holbein to paint a simple, commemorative portrait. They commissioned a manifesto of power. Look at the shelf between them. That is not decoration. It is an arsenal, arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, music. The so-called quadrivium, the sum of human knowledge believed to be essential for mastering the world. The message these men wanted to send to eternity was brutally clear. We measure the heavens. We dominate the earth. We control time. It was the perfect setup, the definitive image of stability, of absolute control. But Hans Holbein knew something they may have preferred to ignore. As he painted the silks, the gold, and the faces with near photographic precision, he quietly began to insert small forensic clues that this world was not solid. It was fragile, and it was rotting from the inside. The first piece of that sabotage is not hidden in the shadows. It is fully exposed, right there in the object that was meant to symbolize harmony, but carries a fracture so subtle that almost no one notices it at first glance. The fracture is in the lute. If you look closely at the strings resting on the lower shelf, you'll notice that one of them isn't just loose. It's snapped, curled against the wood. For a painter obsessed with precision like Hans Holbein, this is not a visual oversight. It is a silent sound painted into the image. In 1533, the lute was the universal symbol of harmony. A broken string meant only one thing: harmony is over. Discord has taken control, but Holbein's Sabotage doesn't stop with music. It moves into something even more sensitive: the science these men believed they had mastered. Raise your eyes to the astronomical instruments. In theory, they were meant to function like the navigation systems of their time, tools designed to prove that the world could be measured with exact precision. But when you look closely, the numbers begin to clash. The sundials don't agree with one another. One reads 10:30, another 9:30. The latitudes don't align. It's as if Holbein is whispering that, despite the luxury, the ermine furs and the confident pose, these men are lost. Their map is broken. Their time is running out. Not even religion offers solid ground. At the center of the lower shelf rests a book of Lutheran hymns. The detail is deeply subversive. Jean de Dinteville and Georges de Selve were Catholics, sent on a diplomatic mission specifically to contain the spread of Protestantism. And yet, Holbein places them beside the words of Martin Luther. The book is open to a hymn about reconciliation, but right next to it appears another message, far colder, an arithmetic page devoted to a single operation: division. Holbein turns this portrait into a silent autopsy of a world in collapse. The music falls out of tune. Science fails. Faith divides. Everything on that shelf serves as evidence that these men's reality is nothing more than an elegant facade on the verge of crumbling. And even so, this still isn't the worst part. Because while these details expose the fragility of the empire they believed they controlled, there is something else in the room. A physical presence that should not be there. An object that does not obey the laws of perspective, and that, when seen from the correct angle, reveals that the greatest danger is not political or religious discord. It's something that is already there with them, waiting. If you're still here, leave a like. Subscribe if you want access to more hidden angles like this. And turn on notifications. These stories don't wait for you to find them. What is waiting on the floor of that room is not an object. It is a mathematical ghost. That grey smear, ignored for centuries as a mistake or dismissed as a fishbone, is actually the most radical application of a dangerous technique called anamorphosis. Holbein was not simply painting an image. He was encoding reality. To understand what that shape is hiding, you have to abandon the comfortable position of a passive spectator. Imagine yourself standing in front of the original painting at the National Gallery. Nearly 7 feet tall. 2 men staring back at you with absolute confidence. If you remain in the center, like any obedient visitor, all you see is wealth, status, and an ugly stain at their feet. Now move. Walk to the extreme right edge of the frame. Press your face close to the wall. Glance downward from above. In that instant, something happens. The stain collapses inward. The lines reorganize. The laws of perspective give way. And what once seemed abstract gains form, weight, and teeth. It is a human skull. Massive, realistic, almost smiling. It cuts through the space between the 2 men as if it had been inserted from another dimension. It is not hidden. It is projected into the foreground, exactly where no one wants to look. Holbein did not use this distortion as a display of technical showmanship. This was a deliberately cruel philosophical choice. At that time, perspective was the ultimate proof that man stood at the center of the universe. the world existed to be organized by the human eye. By distorting the skull, Holbein does the opposite. He declares that death cannot be organized. It does not obey logic. It does not respect the point of view of power. And the way this image functions is even more disturbing than it first appears. As you look from the side and the skull snaps into focus, something happens to the rest of the painting. The ambassadors, the ermine furs, the gilded instruments, everything begins to stretch, to melt, to lose its form. They become the new smear. Holbein created a visual system where it is impossible to have everything at once. If you choose to see life, power, and luxury, death becomes an insignificant blur. But if you choose to face death, all the power in the world dissolves into distortion. This is not a warning about the future, it is a diagnosis of the present of those two men. And the moment you finally recognize the skull, the question stops being, what is this object, and becomes something far more uncomfortable. What is left of Jean and Georges' dignity now that death has entered the room and exposed their secret? In the next part, we will face that final confrontation and understand why, in this painting, seeing death means erasing everything that once seemed solid. The secret that death exposes is simple and devastating. Jean and Georges, despite all their geopolitical influence, are nothing more than actors on a stage about to collapse. The classical term for this is memento mori, a reminder that you are going to die. But Hans Holbein was not satisfied with painting a moral symbol. He built something far more cruel. He created an experience of intellectual humiliation. The moment you tilt your body to see the skull, something uncomfortable happens. For the image to make sense, you have to bow, literally. Meanwhile, the two ambassadors, the men who believed they ruled the world, begin to disappear. They turn into blurred, distorted, almost pathetic figures. Their power exists only as long as you refuse to look at death. This is the painting's true fall. Holbein is cancelling the vanity of an entire generation of the powerful. He shows that wealth, status, and authority are merely a matter of angle. Seen head-on, these men look like giants. Move just a centimetre to the side and they turn into smoke. The confrontation here is absolute. Macrocosm versus microcosm. On the upper shelf, they try to dominate the heavens. On the lower one, to organize the earth. But the skull floats outside the shelves. It does not belong to their system. It cannot be catalogued. It is the only thing truly solid in a room full of expensive illusions. And there is something even more personal in this gesture. Jean de Dinteville, the man who commissioned this work, suffered from a deep melancholy. In his letters, he wrote about the constant feeling of being surrounded by death amid the tensions of the London court. Holbein did not simply paint his patron's fear. He turned it into structure, into perspective, into a trap. By placing the skull in anamorphosis, the artist forces an impossible choice. Either you live inside the comfortable lie of your own importance, or you face the ugly truth of your finitude. There is no middle ground, no neutral angle, no way to focus on both at once. This cancellation is not social, it is existential. All the science of the quadrivium, all the satin silks, all the diplomatic missions fail in the face of that smear on the floor. Human knowledge could not domesticate the end. Death won the debate against gold, and still, Holbein does not end the painting in nihilism. Because even after you discover the skull, even after power collapses before your eyes, there is one last detail almost no one notices. A minimal, isolated presence, watching everything from a place where not even death seems to reach. In the next part, we will reveal that detail and understand why, even in the face of the end, Holbein left a narrow opening for something beyond. In the upper left corner of the canvas, almost slipping out of the frame and camouflaged by the folds of the heavy green curtain, there is a detail you probably ignored throughout the entire video. It is a silver crucifix, tiny, discreet, but placed with surgical precision. It does not rest on the shelves of human knowledge. It does not participate in the distortion of death. It exists outside that system. For Hans Holbein, amid the religious storm of 1533, this was the final word he could offer. Science failed to align time. Politics failed to preserve harmony. Death destroyed the vanity of gold. But there, at the edge of the painting, the artist points to a form of transcendence that survives chaos. The Ambassadors is not just a painting. It is a test of vision. Holbein defeated time because he understood something essential. Reality is fragile, and it depends entirely on where we choose to place our eyes. He proved that a true master is not the one who paints perfection, but the one who knows where to hide the truth so that only the curious, those willing to step out of the center, can find it. Jean de Dinteville and Georges de Selve died 5 centuries ago. Henry VIII's empire changed shape, but Holbein's skull is still there on the floor of the National Gallery, waiting for every new visitor. Not as decoration, as a warning, a silent reminder that power is, in the end, nothing more than an optical illusion. Today, we live in an era obsessed with perfect images, carefully framed lives, success displayed head-on. But the inevitable question remains: what is the stain you're ignoring on the floor of your own room? What would change if you chose to look at your life from an angle that isn't the official one? If this investigation changed the way you see art, leave a like. Subscribe to Behind the Frame and turn on notifications, because these stories don't announce themselves. They surface quietly. From the wrong angle, the next file is already being opened. And remember, sometimes looking the wrong way is the only way to see the truth.